Hi, everyone. I'm Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Touro University, and welcome to the FOLCS film series. Tonight's film, Shepherd, the story of a hero dog. It is a film that is charming, wonderfully shot by the director, Lynn Roth, who has a great agility with the camera, and it's an original film, especially because you could call it an original film that is also a Holocaust film. That features a German Shepherd. You could say it's man's best friend during the Holocaust. It's a film of love and loyalty. It's a film of rescue and survival. It's a complicated film, and we're going to discuss whether it's a Holocaust film and why it's such an unusual one. But it is unique, and it's unlike anything you've ever seen. The film had a commercial release in cities across the United States and in Europe. It is now available in all major streaming platforms, including Amazon and Apple. Some of you were given a chance to watch it through a screening for folks in anticipation of this event. It got really great reviews globally, and it's a film that really deserves to be seen. And here to discuss this film is the internationally acclaimed actress Ayelet Zurer. There's Ayelet. How are you, Ayelet?
Hello.
Did I get the right last name right?
You did the first and the last.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm Jewish. And I've spent a lot of time in Israel. And what did I forgot what Ayelet in the Likud party, she was a guest once. We had Ayelet, the former justice minister. Shaked. She's going to be so mad. Don't tell her I forgot her last name. We had Ayelet Shaked once on our show. So you all know Ayelet from a number of films. And so let's just roll through them. She co-starred in Steven Spielberg's Munich. She co-starred in Ron Howard's Angels and Demons, in which her co-star was Tom Hanks. You've heard of him. She co-stars, are you ready for this? Wait for it, in Man of Steel, right? The film about Superman, in which she plays Superman's mother and his real mother, okay? Not the fake mother from Kansas, but she plays the real mother. We could have brought you Diane Lane tonight, but we brought you the real thing. We brought you the Krypton mother, Ayelet Zurer. She is, you know, universally beloved as one of the finest actors of her generation. And so we hope to see her in many more films. And in this film, yeah, well, it's true, Ayelet. And in this film, it's an interesting film, and your character is very interesting. So welcome to FOLCS, Ayelet. If you're watching us live on YouTube, welcome. Make sure that you go to folks.org and provide your email address so we can give you notice of upcoming events, including the link for an event we have tomorrow night. If you have a question for Ayelet or about the film, you can leave it in the Q&A box. As you know, our style is very conversational. It's fun, entertaining, and super smart. You never leave a FOLCS conversation without being a lot smarter. So let's start, Ayelet. It seems to me that this film is personal to you. And I'll tell you why I think that. This isn't your first Holocaust movie. You made, and you don't even know this, one of my favorite novels was Adam Resurrected, the Yoram Kunyak novel, which was adapted into a film in which you co-star. And many people thought that Jeff Goldblum, that's the best role that he ever played. And you were also in another adaptation of another novel that's one of my favorites, Fugitive Pieces, which is based on the Annie Michaels novel, the Canadian poet. And that's just, you know, those are two novels that what are the odds that both of them got adapted and you were in both of them? And this Lynn Roth film is a Holocaust film. So I'm wondering, is it purely the coincidence of casting? Is it something that you're really interested in and pursuing? Or is it just because they're three very different films. Those other films one would call post-Holocaust films.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor. And thank you for all the kind words. Regarding your question, it's funny. I actually met Lynn way before I heard about her film, which she was adapting and writing and rewriting. And I think
She reached out to you.
She reached out to me, but we knew each other. We have mutual friends, and we've met. And she at some point raised the question if would I be interested in joining the cast. And
now it is important just to tell the audience, right? This was a best-selling novel in Israel.
It was, yeah, and I think it's done pretty well internationally. You know, I always feel like there's certain roles that if the story is good enough, it doesn't really matter if I stretch myself or if it's something new for me or not. It's really the story and what it has to say, and what it can, in what way I can give back to the world. And I feel like really obligated to tell this story, particularly being a daughter to a woman who went through the Holocaust, even if she was a very young girl. I always feel really intense.
So your mother is a survivor. Did she come before, during British, did she come before the Holocaust ended, or did she come after?
My mom actually has a really interesting story. She was probably 3 or 4 when the war started.
And what country was she in?
We're talking about Slovakia.
Uh-huh.
She was adopted by Christian people amongst the villagers where the family.
Wait, she was adopted because her parents were killed, or
no,
she was
because they had to hide the fact that they were Jews.
I see.
So their 2 older people took over, you know, the girls, which is my mom and my aunt, and she lived there for a while.
And she was raised as a Christian child.
Completely going to church and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But then the war started to show signs that it's becoming really dangerous, and people were starting to notice who's Jewish and who's not, and they were taken to a school, a monastery, where they stayed with the other girls for I believe another year or so, maybe 2. But then people started telling who's Jewish and who's not,
yeah.
and so the story that I heard from my grandma was, my mom had told me about that only like in the last 2-3 years we were talking about that, and she's older, she's in her late 80s. So in the midst of the night, they came down from the mountain where they hid my grandmother.
So wait, your grandparents were managed to hide the entire time? Yeah, but they hid without the daughters.
They knew the forest really well because their job was to deal with the woods, and so they knew the forest really well, and so they hid and really deep inside the forest. And it was a 3-day walk. So they took the girls in the middle of the night and they climbed for 3 days, including sleeping, walking through the night, and then sleeping daytime in caves and places.
And this was done with their own natural resources. In other words, this isn't parents who somehow were hidden in a barn. They were actually living on their own in the forest.
Yeah, with the adults.
Yes, other adults, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And then after 3 days walk, which is a whole, I don't want to tell you the whole story because we were not, but they got to the deer shack where they lived for another year in the middle of the forest until the war ended. And then they actually came out.
Yeah, I don't think our audience yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was gonna say, I don't think our audience realizes how unusual that story is. In fact, in many of the cases, the families that had taken in the children wouldn't give the children back. There are actually stories of the people that simply wouldn't give them back. And in many cases, they couldn't actually reclaim the kids until years later, until the family was ultimately reunited. In this story, this is so unusual that they actually sneak back in the middle of the night and take the girls back up into the mountains and the forest with them, where they still continue to hide and find a way, again, to sort of outlast the Nazis by living in the forest. I think that's just an incredible Holocaust survival story. So obviously, this is personal to you.
So obviously it's personal, yeah.
Yeah,
and
obviously.
It's very strange because I never really dealt with that, never talked about it. It's not really something I lived through. It was not talked about in my family, but I don't know. I guess when I read these stories, I always feel obligated. If they come to me, I feel that I should take part in them.
So what's interesting about this story, which is so different from your mother's side of the family in Slovakia, is that you're talking about German Jews. This is a family of assimilated German Jews who are, I think the father says, 6th generation Germans. And from their perspective, they could not be more German.
Yes.
And of course, what's interesting here is that the movie takes place in the early days of the Third Reich, when Hitler implements and introduces the Nuremberg laws, which immediately strip Jews of their civil rights, their civil liberties, their human rights, and disenfranchise them as citizens, so that there are certain professions that are no longer to be allowed in, places they can't go, they can't intermarry with non-Jews. And so a number of things are happening to him, and Jews are starting to leave. And you have the unfortunate story, not that uncommon, where the family stays too long, in part because in this case, the father believes that it will pass over because after all, they're Germans. What's interesting is your character, the mother. The mother's the realist, the pragmatist. She's the one, and I find that really interesting. You know, the movie opens on a female dog, you know, giving birth to a litter of dogs, sort of maternal instincts. And there is something that there's sort of some vision or wisdom in the character that you portray. She knows exactly where this is going, anticipates every move. And I wonder whether it's not, now that I know there's a Holocaust story in the Zurers, but also you're Israeli. So of course you understand what's happening.
I do, but I think really what resonated for me was a story that my grandma told me, where the war started and things started to change and people stick around, you know, they haven't moved and they didn't take it very seriously. She was the one who made sure the girls are going to live with other people and made the forest a hideout place. And actually the whole family was wiped complete entirely. No one stayed. And
the only survivors was your grandmother
and her family.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, again, so you're saying that naivete that even Slovakian Jews had.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think there's a dark jokes that says, what's democracy? Democracy is 3 wolves sitting with a sheep asking what they're going to eat for dinner. So, you know, it happens slowly, gradually. The sheep doesn't know it's a sheep. And hides the fact that it's a wolf. So, you know, nobody really takes any notice of I mean, they do take notice, but they don't think they always think it's going to end. Because logic will take over, but logic doesn't necessarily take over.
But this is but the maternal instincts of your character seems to me that there's an endless amount of premonition. She's trying to protect their children. Eventually they homeschool them. They discover that there's certain stores they can no longer shop in. And the mother is somehow trying to preserve some sense of normalcy amid this madness, right? How to explain to children what is actually happening. You know, Hitler's name is not mentioned in the movie. Well, it is Heil Hitler, but there's not a lot of talk about it in the house. All that we know is that the Nuremberg laws have changed the rights of Germans, and so there is, I thought, you know, and you played sort of an anchor of the film in recognizing what is happening, powerless, recognizing what's happening, but ultimately powerless. And in fact, like your grandmother's story, there were Jews in Germany who left earlier. It's just that this family didn't. So do you think these stories are important to tell as both an Israeli and a child of Holocaust survivors? Is the world a better place because of, say, Schindler's List or The Pianist or Sophie's Choice or Shepherd, the story of a hero dog. Do you think we're better off with these stories?
Absolutely. I think they're reminders, because history has the tendency to repeat itself, and it's no joke. It does. So, you can see in these last few years that we see more and more upfront slurred that degrades Jews in some ways, and they're more attacks, and it's been and I don't think it's necessarily just Jews. I think there's a bit of a hatred rising, maybe in connection to the pandemic.
But Ayelet, let's be clear though. The statistics on hate crimes are overwhelmingly committed against Jews.
It may 2021 particularly.
Yes, exactly. But I'm saying, the Jews of Europe, in some cases, certainly in France and in Sweden, I would say Sweden, France, and London, for that matter, Jews cannot function as Jews. They can't wear religious symbols. People don't realize what's happened to the Jews of France. And in fact, your native country, Israel, has been the beneficiary of that, because many French Jews have moved to Israel over the last 10 years. So I think most people in America are surprised about the rise and spike of anti-Semitism. But if you're a European Jew, you were not surprised at all. And you're feeling the sort of foreshadowing of what Jews felt like in the 1930s in Europe. So you're right, there is a spike in hate crimes. But let's just be clear, among Jews, it's statistically disproportionate. Yes. But I will say that in the 1990s, some of the films I just mentioned, including The Pianist, there was sorry to use the word, like a heyday for the Holocaust, where there were many Holocaust-related films. And there was a number of years in the Academy Awards that the best documentary was almost always on the Holocaust. It was almost a running joke in the 1990s. Every year, if you wanted to be nominated, make a Holocaust documentary. And so there was an enormous, they built a museum in Washington, D.C., the Holocaust Museum. Schindler's List won all these awards. They started to record the testimonies of Holocaust survivors. So this was happening, but I do think what's interesting about this film, and I don't know whether this is what you and Lynn Roth think about when you think about the responsibility of people seeing the film, there actually are fewer Holocaust-related movies that are being made now. Right now, a dramatic feature film about the Holocaust is going to be rare, certainly in the English language. And I think that that's important to note, that this film is not actually competing with other movies at the same time, trying to tell this story. This is, among the few that are.
Yes, I agree. But I also have to say that I feel like Lynn has done something really remarkable, in the sense that she managed to take this really thick, dark story and transcend it into a family movie. The way she painted it, the cinematography, the storytelling, even the beautiful August Maturo he's playing the role is the boy, so sweet. The boy, he's so sweet and lovely, and I think there's something really unique in the way she chose to play this to tell this story, because she really sort of lets younger people watch it and understand what because they can't watch Schindler's List,
Well, it's important, right?
I mean, it takes a little bit of maturity to watch this movie and enjoy it I mean, to really be affected by it. But I think her movie is capable of affecting younger people, and I think the younger you get to young adult to understand the history of not so far away history, then you really manage to educate. Because I think one of the problems that I'm seeing is that we are brainwashed through social media so much. It's so much misinformation that, it's dangerous.
Right. Well, it's interesting because in many ways, what Lynn did with the film mirrors what the children are experiencing in the movie. right? The incomprehensibility of it, right? How do you as the mother convey to the two children what is happening and where this family might end up, right? How do you actually, this family, it did not function like your own family. And so, we all know where this family ends up, but how do you protect the children and what information you give them? And in some ways, the movie itself does the same thing with young people who would watch it, because in some ways it's a movie about a dog. You have a Holocaust survivor dog here. You have a dog
you have a perspective of a dog on human behavior and human cruelty, and it really deals with the question of what distinguishes humans from beasts.
In fact, we're
told in a way that we can absorb it and not feel overwhelmed, I feel like. And I think that's a different type of movie, and I think that's really, really important to show your family, show your kids, because you can with this movie.
So let me give the audience just a little more of the details of the plot, which is that one of the laws of the Nuremberg laws is that Jews can't even own pets, so that they end up having to give their precious dog away. And so the family is separated and the boy is separated from his dog. But what happens with the dog is he ends up becoming a dog that the Nazis train to find hidden Jews, and to be a dog that would also patrol a labor camp during the Holocaust. So you're talking about a dog that was raised by Jews that becomes also a dog who's got a nose for Jews, because it's going to be his job to find them and to keep them in line. And so there's this extraordinary, paradox and a moral dilemma for a dog that doesn't know morality, right? We don't know, we have the perspective of the dog, but we don't know what the dog knows. And in fact, towards the end of the movie, the boy says to the dog, "This must be so confusing for you," because the dog is also, after he leaves the boy, he's raised, cared for by a Nazi who comes across as a dog lover, who loves the dog. In many ways seems like a good German. And so the dog is experiencing, the boy and a Nazi who also takes good care of him. And there's a kind of moral dilemma that the audience faces, because, which dog do they want? Do they want the dog that lived with the Jews or the dog that lived with the Nazis? Because the dog is trained in a very different way. And yet we're learning from the director, from Lynn Roth, that the dog actually doesn't lose his memory. The dog doesn't lose the memory of either of his masters. And so there's almost a conflict. Two people love this dog, and even the Nazi comes across as someone who is humane. In fact, he has this great line in the film where he says something like, "Sometimes I think dogs are more humane than human beings, because dogs simply sniff at each other, then they urinate to mark off their territory, but they don't kill each other and conquer each other. But it's not enough for human beings to just sniff each other out and urinate. They actually have to go conquer." And that's a deep line that the Nazi conveys.
It's also interesting from the perspective that there's love between the soldier and the dog. While he can kill other human beings, he cares for the dog. The dog is worth more than the human being from his perspective, somewhat. And that's something that's so subtle in the film, but it's really a question: how can you love dearly an animal, a dog, but at the same time not have any compassion towards human beings?
Yeah, and actually, you reminded me, there's the line that happens where one of the other guards said, "We should have a contest where the dogs fight each other," and that the Ukrainians in the community and who are guards can bet on the dogs. And the Nazi who has Caleb's dog, the Jewish boy's dog, says, "I would never do something like that." Right. Yeah. So on the one hand, he has no problem with mass murder of Jews, but he will not let his dog be injured for no reason to fight other dogs as an act of gambling. So I'm curious. the last few months, there's been controversies directly, not just with anti-Semitism, but with Holocaust denial. Kanye West, in one case, Kyrie Irving, the basketball player who used to play here in Brooklyn, where I am. And in both instances, there was a denial of the Holocaust, a denial of Jewish victimhood, and a resurfacing of stereotypes, ugly, vulgar, old stereotypes of Jews. And I'm wondering if we could arrange it, if Kyrie Irving and Kanye West would come to your house for a screening, do you think they would benefit from this movie? Or do you think that there are some people who, for whatever reason, are hating and can't be persuaded not to hate?
I'm an optimist, so I think education goes a long way. But personal education, do you know what I mean? Like, if you actually sit with someone in the room face to face and you hear the story, I think the fact that we had an opportunity to have Holocaust survivors sitting in schools and talking about their experience made a huge change. You have to speak to these people, I think, on a personal level.
You're saying the film needs backup.
It does.
Right? It helps to have backup.
It does. Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I was going to ask you also, do you think, most people, we're living in a visual culture. Unfortunately, I'm a writer. But we're living in a visual culture. I've capitulated. I surrender to that idea. That's one of the reasons we do FOLCS.
Yes, but they said the world is invented by words. So
right. I know, but people fortunately or unfortunately learn their history nowadays from feature films. People are more likely to see a movie than they are to read a book. And so that puts a lot of burden on a movie if that's its job, especially a dramatic feature, not a documentary, because a dramatic feature, its purpose is aesthetics and entertainment. Its purpose, it's not singularly there to teach. It's good if it does. I mean, I think about the movie Munich, in which you were in. Does it really tell the story of the Israelis avenging the death of their Olympic team in the 1972 Olympics? Their entire team was slaughtered at the Olympics by the Palestinian Liberation, the PLO. I remember, I wrote about that film, by the way, Ayelet. I remember the Israelis were critical of the movie and the Palestinians were critical. Everyone, I wrote about how I thought the Israelis were wrong, that the movie had things in it that they should be proud of. And I thought the Palestinians were wrong because I thought there were things in the movie that they should be upset with, and they should have wanted something else to be in there because it did not portray the Palestinians in any way a flattering way. And I thought that the Israelis should recognize that it humanized Israelis. It said, even when you have to commit, acts of vengeance, you're still filled with anguish the night before you have to do it. That you're filled with this moral dilemma and you still go and do it the next day, but you're not happy about it. In any event, I'm just wondering.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I can just say to that I believe when someone puts a movie out, they put also a question mark with it. I think in this particular instant, I feel that they really genuinely try to talk more than the actual politics of the story and the time frame and who's right and who's wrong and what's right and who's coming out of it better looking or not better looking. I think the question was about violence and bloodshed, that
the recycling,
the recycle of that. And I think that's what he was trying to put out and have a discussion. The thing is, once you deal with these types of subject matters, everybody sees themselves in them, but they want to be seen and heard the way that they see themselves, not in a way where it's a little bit more there's more layers and points of views in it. So
yeah, well, I must tell you that I thought also, well, let's just talk about Munich just one more time, just one more thing. The end of the film was very problematic, especially for Israelis. because, you know,
Israel people were upset about that, and I believe they, you know, I
because you're in the character, and you're the part that you play. You don't live very far from where I am right now. I just want you to know that neighborhood is very close to where I'm sitting right now. And she and her husband don't go home. They stay in Brooklyn.
yes.
It's a very sad idea.
It was. I don't think it reflects opinion of anyone who's creating the film particularly, but it does sit on a specific book that was developed into that. So I can't talk to why it was done the way that it was done. And I think it was really. I remember they really questioned what would be the right thing to do.
Well, Ayelet, it's even worse than that. The last scene has the World Trade Center in the background.
I remember that.
And that's a very haunting image in New York.
It is haunting.
You don't put the World Trade Center in a movie unless you're trying to make a statement. And it seemed to some people, I was certainly one of them who wrote about it, it seemed as if there is that something in the story of the recycling of violence in the avenging of the killing of the Israeli athletes plays itself up to 9/11, which is, to me, dubiously historical. Like, I'm not sure I understand that connection, but clearly Steven Spielberg and my old friend Tony Kushner thought it was worth making that point, that the World Trade Center is in the background of this violence. We're going to see other violence, which I thought was a very controversial idea. And I still find it haunting.
I wonder, you know, I should have asked that question, because I really wonder now if they did it with that in mind, or really did it because in the time where that meeting took place, it took place there and the Twin Towers were actually there. It's a good question to ask, and maybe I'll ask it.
Ayelet, I swear to you, you're not going to believe it because you're going to think he can't be serious. That location is right where I live. The docks in Brooklyn. I literally am 3 minutes away from that scene at the end with the background of that. It's right at the docks of Brooklyn with a bird's eye view of the World Trade Center. I find it implausible that scene doesn't mean that. You're right, because they could have shot it with the Statue of Liberty. They could have shot it with the Brooklyn Bridge. They could have shot a lot of things in the background to give you a sense of the time and place. So, I want to know, you may not even know the answer to this. The movie had a different title. It was called Shepherd, the story of a Jewish dog.
Which is similar to the book's name.
Which is the title of the novel. Yeah. And now the movie is called Shepherd, the story of a hero dog. And I know you're Israeli, but you live in the United States now. I'm wondering whether this gets into the world of white privilege, right? Well, it seems to me that it's very unfashionable nowadays to think of Jews as victims. That Jews are supposed to be thought of as benefiting from white privilege. And so the idea of even raising Holocaust-related issues in the present university settings and in progressive settings is very unfashionable. You know, and Jews are considered white. And by the way, I was going to ask you, I know that Gal Gadot has a Holocaust part of her family too, but they're also, I think, Libyan. They're clearly Mizrahi Jews. Is your father's side of the family?
Ethiopians, Jews, it's Jews from all over the world.
Exactly.
Any skin color you can think about.
Right. Well, that's why it's interesting to have you.
But I have to say that the reason the name of the movie changed, which I've learned from Lynn, is actually not supporting your thought. I believe it was sold to support the distribution of the film to many, many places, and the word Jew or Jewish would not help the movie get there. And
I know, but that doesn't make me feel better, Ayelet.
I'm sorry that you don't feel better.
Yeah, it's still disturbing to me, right? Because what you're really saying is the movie is a harder sell with the word Jew in it.
True. I mean, but I think you can look at the empty side of the empty, you know,
half full.
But yeah, exactly, the cup half full. I see the part that's full. Again, I'm optimistic.
Because more people will see it.
Some people listen. You can see so many shows and so many films on your iPhone, on your TV? And why would you choose something that's, resonant, heavy, or sad, or, maybe something that you consider to be different than you? If you want to educate people and tell the story, we should make it really
well
available.
Maybe because you're Israeli, I couldn't resist, because I know that you live in a world, in an area of the world where there are people that bizarrely think that Israelis are white and not realize that in fact half the country are people of color. And so I thought that, well, is this another example of white privilege? At least we have an Israeli playing the mother who really understands. In fact, I was going to say that what's interesting about the film is not just, to me, Kyrie, Irving, and Kanye West. Whoopi Goldberg should see the movie. Why? Because Whoopi Goldberg recently, over the last several months, continues to say that the Holocaust had nothing to do with race. It's purely man's inhumanity to man, because Jews are white people and that they're not subject to racial injustice. Clearly, Whoopi Goldberg, despite her last name, doesn't realize that the Nazis thought of themselves as the master race. And the reason they were persecuting Jews is because they were inferior race. And if the Holocaust was all about race. So when Whoopi Goldberg says it has nothing to do with race, she needs to do a lot more reading, because this movie even says it, because in the beginning of the movie, you see, it's very interesting what Lynn Roth did, because when it comes to dogs, breeding matters, right? Pedigree of a dog. So the Germans look and say, if it's a German Shepherd, is it a real German Shepherd or is it a mutt, right? A mixture, because we don't like mixtures. So that's a way to tell the story about the master race and what they were thinking, because the Jewish family is going to get the exact same treatment because they are not considered part of the master race. They are subhuman, a subspecies, an inferior race. And so I thought that that's another piece to this, of thinking about, Jews as being white and not being racial, when in fact, Israel is not a European settler colonial country. Half the country is people of color, and a former Miss Israel was Ethiopian. So it's hard to call that a white country. I was wondering whether you might not have been aware, there was a German philosopher in the 20th century, Theodor Adorno. And I don't know what you know about him and what he said about the Holocaust, but he said something that relates to this movie. And I thought something that Lynn Roth gets right and does a good job of it. Adorno said, and it's loosely translated into different ways, but sometimes it said, no poetry after Auschwitz. Or some people translate it that says, poetry after Auschwitz is barbarism. So those are the two quotes. And they're all attributed to Adorno. So then people say, well, what did he mean? What was he trying to say? And the answer was, you can't make art out of atrocity. And filmmakers for years recognizes, even novelists, if you are not a survivor of the camps, you can't write about the camps, right? You can't write about that because we use words like unspeakable, unimaginable, ineffable. And if we use those words, that means they're beyond the capacity of the artists to imagine it, right? So that's why even Schindler's List, this movie doesn't take place in a death camp. It's important that in the movie early on, we're told it's a work camp, it's a labor camp. Schindler's List is not a death camp. Schindler's List is a labor camp. Even Steven Spielberg knew the rule. It's interesting. All the artists, for the most part, kept the rule. You can't go into the killing fields. You can't go into the gas chambers. If you remember in Schindler's List, there's a little misdirection. Some of the people are going to Auschwitz and the showers start turning on, if you remember that scene. And I remember people like me said, whoa, you can't do that. You can't show the showers. You can't even show Auschwitz. And water came out, which was an interesting maneuver that Spielberg, he wanted to get away with something. He wanted to get away with the showers, but he let water come out. And then those same Jews are taken back by Schindler and rescued again. So they go to Auschwitz, they take literally a shower, and then they end up going back. So I just wonder whether that's something that you think that you agree with, that there's a limitation to art of what it can show or what it should show, that there are restrictions. Do you actually believe in that as an artist? And let me just end by telling you, you know, the American director and actor Jerry Lewis, iconic actor, the French beloved. One of his films was still not seen. It's considered unwatchable. It's called The Day the Clown Cried. And it's a Jerry Lewis film about a clown in Auschwitz. And what he does, yeah, I think that's the title. It's not the Day the Clown Cried. And apparently the film is unwatchable. And very few people have actually seen it. And it's used as an example of what Theodor Adorno meant. And in this movie, I think it's interesting, as what you said earlier, it's relatable, right? A kid can watch this movie. It's about the Holocaust, but there's nothing gruesome about it. There's nothing about, you know, the true grotesqueness of the inhumanity.
You know, films are really unique vehicle to transcend people's experience. I feel that sometimes you can push the boundaries with certain things. Some people can handle it and some people just can't. Particularly with Holocaust or any human atrocity, I feel that if you show things that are so brutal in a way that we cannot perceive, you make an impact, but maybe your idea, your hope for love, for you may be authentic, but you will not give hope. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And I think overall, from my perspective, it's not enough just to shake people up. You need to be really balanced in the storytelling where you can shake your audience at the same time, give them hope. Because when you give them hope, I think they're coming out of the theater with responsibility of some sort. And I think that's really what you want to achieve.
Man, Ayelet, you are really a half glass full girl. I mean, you really, no, don't be sorry. That's commendable, you know, to you. You look, you're a believer in the human spirit.
I mean, if I wasn't, I don't think I would act anymore.
Because you actually think that when you tell the story, you're opening up what art does. It provides information through a different portal. It comes through a different way. And you think that when you provide that information, human beings can use it in some way.
It's like putting a seed inside a really barren land.
Wow.
And then hoping that rain will come and something will come out of this seed.
And in that way, you might say movies do a better job than books because you can get more people.
No, I'm not saying that.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying, but you might say, but you said this about Indonesia, and I took you seriously, which is to say, look, you go where the audience is. You know, this is where the audience is. You plant the seed here. I'm not saying you're making a value judgment. I'm not saying you're saying books are inferior. I'm just saying that if you want to plant a seed, you might as well plant it in a movie because you're more likely to plant it and actually have it received. And you know, given the culture in which we're in, maybe that is what the most that we can ultimately hope for.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons that there are people, and I've written a lot when in the 90s, when all these films came out, I was asked by a number of places, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal. I wrote about all those films in the 90s. So I'm on record. I usually have problems with Holocaust films. Let me just say, Lynn Roth doesn't understand how much I, favored this movie because anyone who's been reading me would say he couldn't like this. And I said, no, I actually think this does things right. I mean, it does it right. It does not, in my mind, trample over profound sensibilities. It doesn't violate the spirit of the idea of the hubris, right? The hubris of saying, I can transport you to Auschwitz. I can take you with me because I have a camera and I'm Lynn Roth and I'm really good with the camera. I can take you there. This movie does not attempt to do that, right? It does not attempt to bring you to a place. And in fact, it doesn't even try to give you a happy ending, right? Which is why Holocaust movies are misnomers in some ways, because Hollywood likes to make feel-good endings, life-affirming endings. And a Holocaust movie, I'm not sure should be life-affirming. If it's really about the Holocaust, I mean, you might disagree there because you want to provide more hope. But if it's really supposed to convey what happened, right, maybe Hollywood is not the best way to do it. So I'm wondering,
the film's job is to convey exactly what happened. I think that's more like a documentary, or if you remember Shoah, which was a 7 or 9 hours, I can't remember.
9 hours.
9 hours film, if you really wanted to learn, you know.
But that's different because it goes to the point that you said before. A documentary is testimonial in nature. Exactly. It's there to document. Right. And a feature film is really there to entertain. It's art. So it doesn't have the same burden, but I do think it maybe should still follow the same rules. For instance, the Nazi who has the dog for half of the movie, right? The dog is in his possession, is in some ways portrayed as the good German. And there does seem to be an impulse. We see it in The Pianist. We did a film once that you might not have seen. It was an Italian film starring John Turturro, where he plays Primo Levi. And it's based on Primo Levi's second memoir called The Truce. In Europe, it's called The Truce. In Israel, it's called The Truce also. But in America, it's called The Reawakening. And we had John Turturro was with us at that night. And we also had Elie Wiesel. So it was a good night. You can watch that on our line if you want to see it. And that movie actually did something strange. In the book, there's a scene where takes place 9 months after the liberation of the camps, and a German Nazi who's under arrest is facing Primo Levi, and they're saying face to face, the persecutor and the persecuted. And in the movie, I asked John Turturro about this. They changed the scene. In the real scene, the Nazi shows no emotion, but in the movie, Ayelet, the Nazi goes to his knees as if to beg forgiveness. But that's not what happened in the memoir. Forget it's not a novel. It's actually the story.
Yeah.
And so
so the question is, how did it make you feel?
Yes.
How did it make some other person feel? Is there, because we want to see remorse, right? We don't want to see a bunch of Nazis sitting in, I don't know, Argentina and thinking, oh, we did great, you know.
Just for those people who don't know exactly what Ayelet means, many Nazis that escaped the Nuremberg trials ended up in Latin America. So you saw them in Paraguay, you saw them mostly in Argentina. That's why she said Argentina. Go ahead.
So what, you know, a normal human being would think, okay, the person, once they learn what they've done, must have remorse. It's so hard to grasp this type of vicious behavior towards another person.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Did you see the German film Der Untergang?
I couldn't watch it.
Okay, so one of the things about Der Untergang, which by the way, I wrote about negatively because that's what I do. But
I'm suspecting you're a hater.
I don't know what it is. I'm a truth teller. That's what I am. I like to think I'm a truth teller. But some people think I'm a hater.
You're a truth teller of your perspective.
Yes, that's right. Well, actually, I don't know. I don't think I believe in what our vice president says. Thank you for telling us our truth. I do think there are objective truths. I don't think truths are subjective.
This is actually an argument I have with my husband on a regular basis. I say there's no one truth, and he claims there is one.
Yeah, I'm with him. Just tell your husband. Right. Yes. I'm standing beside Mr. Zurer. So the idea of in Untergang, Hitler is a German film. Hitler is seen as being very loving to dogs, children, and secretaries. Interesting, right? You were saying a group of Nazis in Argentina.
It could be true.
It probably is true.
Probably is. Yeah.
Probably true that he was great with kids. He was great with dogs, and he was great with his secretaries, and he was a mass murderer. He killed 11 million people, but he was great with that. So I do think there is an impulse in feature filmmaking to have that moment, a beat, you know, where it's not entirely evil. We did a film recently, a film that was based on the Eichmann capture called Operation Finale. And we had Ben Kingsley, who plays Eichmann, and we had the director of the film. That was a nice night we had. We had Ben Kingsley, and we had, and it was very clear there that Ben Kingsley had a few scenes in which Eichmann is in custody in Argentina, and he's having a friendly relationship with one of the Mossad agents who kidnapped him. And every night they meet, and it looks like a father-son relationship. And I asked Ben Kingsley, I said, you're playing a monster, right? Did you object? Did you say to the director, I'm a monster? And he said, no, I wanted to show more of the humanity in Eichmann. And I said, of course, because I'm a hater, as you say, I said, why would you want to show the humanity? He was a monster. Why would want to confuse
He's an actor, so that's his instinct.
Exactly. He said, I'm an actor. I'm not going to sit there and do what you want me to do. I'm going to show you a full range of emotion.
But I have to tell you something. It doesn't matter sometimes what an actor does. What a director does in the editing room can change one's performance entirely. It can create an eerie, subtle niceness that's not real or whatever. So I haven't watched that film, but I would not necessarily put the responsibility solely on the actor, because you can manipulate a story by editing, music, all of it, if you have a director that wants to. So there must be a reason for.
Well, I just want you to know, Ayelet, we had the director that night also. So I definitely asked him. The minute that Kingsley said he didn't want to answer that, I went right to it. I said, all right, why did you do that? Why did you shoot that?
It's really,
are you of the view
to see
are you of the
choices of
wait, say that again.
I'm saying that it's so interesting to me, choices in the editing room and, you know, the post that really creates the film after, that always really interesting to me, because that's where the responsibility lies, I feel.
So I'm going to ask I'm going to leave. I have a really tough question, but I'll wait for that, and then we'll
if that's the tough question.
No, you know, you have been having fun. Come on, admit it. You've had fun. It does seem, though, that some of the films that, when we think of Holocaust films, this film falls into an interesting category of survival and rescue, because the dog is a rescuer, right? And Schindler's List is a rescue film. And the films about Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat, are rescue films. And films about Janusz Korczak, who was the Polish doctor who rescued Jewish orphans and eventually went to his death with the orphans. He wouldn't let them leave. He went with them to Auschwitz. So those are sort of the rescue films. It does seem like that when we make these films, we make them either as rescue films, this film falls into that, or sometimes resistance films where Jews are fighting back, like Defiance, which is a Ed Zwick film. Ed Zwick has been a guest of FOLCS twice before. And, you know, films about Jewish partisans. It's interesting to think about. There's certain stories that there's a limit to how much victimization we can show, right? Schindler's List is about two people, a rescuer and a monster. The Jews are actually secondary characters in the movie, right?
Because I feel that in certain stories, you either have, if you really want a hero, if you want the hero's journey, you have to have a hero. So if you want to have a hero that's Jewish in these circumstances, then it has to be someone who fights back. But if it's not, if it's a victim, then you'll use someone else. You
don't have the hero. All right, I like that answer. The movie, although I said doesn't have a classic Hollywood ending, again, it's such a watchable, entertaining movie that it's hard to use the word Holocaust film, but it is. But it also doesn't give you the cheapness, what I would say, something, sorry, I know we keep talking about Steven Spielberg, would have given us more of a,
by the way, I adore, and I think actually Schindler's List really affected me. Now, there's a difference between us, maybe in age. So maybe I watched it in a time when I was really absorbing what he was saying. Do you know what I mean? And I was actually in New York at the time, as an aspiring actress and dog walker.
You remember you were living here and you were a dog walker when Schindler's List came out?
Yeah, I auditioned for that movie and I didn't get it.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to work with him all my life, and I got lucky to work with him in Munich. I adore him. I know his intentions are so pure as a human being and as an artist. I mean, you can say whatever you want to say about the editing, about the writing.
Yeah.
But just to be on the same page, Schindler's List is a tremendous film.
Well, remember, Schindler's List ends with the survivors and their children visiting the grave of Schindler, right? And it is a good message to take home, right? I'm not sure it's a Holocaust message, but it's a really good message.
I think it is because, he served us a movie that people can watch. I know he worked really, really hard on this. And then he took it to another level and told us this may be a story, but it's actually real. So I think he leveled it up to a place where we were like,
well, let's just,
we're used to the idea, okay, it's a movie, so this may not happen, or maybe it didn't happen that way. Our brains tend to play with us,
right,
comes to things that are uncomfortable.
So what I was going to say about this film, your film, it has an interesting pro-Zionist message, because the film doesn't reunite the family. We don't know what happened, but we have to assume he's an orphan, right? Lynn Roth doesn't feed us the happy ending where they all, like what happened with your grandparents reclaiming the girls. That's a really good story. Great ending to a terrible story.
Well, actually, it didn't end up there if you want to hear the rest of the story.
We don't have time, but I would love to one day. So I'm just saying this has a pro-Zionist message, interestingly, right? Because the boat is headed, they have passage. So it is ironic that, you star in a film that presents this, interesting, it's not a happy ending, but there's, at one point, the boy says, what will our life be like? I think he asks the question, and he can't imagine, right? And one thing he probably can't imagine, that in 6-7 years, there'll be a Jewish state, right? It must be absurd to have thought he's sitting there with his dog and he can't imagine what's next, but that he's going to probably by that age was fighting in the war of liberation, right? That boy was probably old enough. It's sort of an interesting thing that only the audience can imagine. The boy says, can you imagine what our life will be like? And it probably is unimaginable. Last question. I think I know the answer to this because you've said it in different ways. But, there are people, I was one of them, has been critical of the use of the Anne Frank story because of the focus on the language. In spite of everything, I still believe that people are good at heart. And that has caused controversy. That Anne Frank, that line is often used as the pull quote from the diary. And people have been, I am one of them, complained because the father, Otto Frank, edited the diary, right? And so took out a lot of things that were more harsh about how she felt about her life. And so instead you pull this out and this becomes the message. And I wondered, given what you said, again, you're a half full kind of girl, Zurer. I'm just saying, do you think, Thane, here you are again, that's not a bad thing to people to walk away with, that I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are good at heart.
I do.
Oh God, boy, we really, it's a very hard question to answer.
I don't think it's a simple question to ask. I think your deeds on this earth really matter. And so your intention sometimes can be great, but your actions might not. And your words really matter. And what you put out there in this world really matters. What you read and how you take responsibility of your actions really matters. But deep, deep inside, I'm hoping that, we'll prevail as human beings. We won't see each other as different because this one is Black, or this one is Jewish, or this one is Muslim, or this one is Chinese, or this, I feel like it's time to move past that. And the only way to move past that is to understand that everyone has suffering, has suffered, has suffering, will suffer. And that the only thing that connects us is love. And yes, it's optimistic and maybe a little, I don't know.
Saccharine.
Yes, but
Sugary,
but I'm hopeful. Otherwise, why would I bring a child to this world? Why would I raise my kid not in a jungle somewhere?
Ayelet, let me tell you, that was a wonderful way to end. That was so well phrased. That was so heartfelt. That was the best walk away message, takeaway. So really, thank you for that. Let me just take one. It's not a question, but it's a statement. So I think what I'm going to give, this comes from a woman named Doris Rohr Strauss. She says, Thane, showing monsters liking dogs or canaries does not show any humanity. It shows that monsters can appear to be human, and he is accepted by millions of people who would like to coat their hatred of others with this pretense. It's a statement. It's a complicated statement, but I thought I would give Doris a chance to have that comment, given the nature of what you and I talked about.
Yeah.
Do you have a response to that, by the way?
I think it's an angle. And as I said, there is no one truth, and I'm sure there's truth to that too.
Wow, well
It's
said.
not a singular truth.
Ayelet, I must tell you, you've really, enlightened and enlivened the conversation and added a lot to this discussion in ways that some of our guests, not everybody, ended on such a great flourish like you did. So I want to thank you for that. No, that was.
Thank you for wonderful, challenging questions.
Thank you, Ayelet, for a great night. We're always rooting for you. We'll always welcome you back with more films. And for now, I'm Thane Rosenbaum for FOLCS. Good night, everybody.